It is the morning of November 24th, and it looks to me like Bitcoin wants to go up to maybe $97,000, $100,000 or so before having a reversal and maybe setting a bottom. But personally, I think we would probably go lower. I think we're setting up for a classic dead cat bounce. Now, on the daily time frame here for Bitcoin, the first signal of, hey, maybe that bounce is actually finally here, is because we actually got a meaningful bounce indicator from a candle standpoint, which is this long wick on the daily time frame. That's telling us that the possibility of us seeing a bounce is here, that the bulls were willing to come in with confidence and in great numbers to potentially kick off a dead cat bounce, which is when you have a bounce upwards, but because the cat is dead, it just falls further. But what gives even more credence to this, just by looking at the daily chart, is yes, you have this first initial candle indicator, but it's happening at the same time as we are very oversold on our daily charts stochastic RSI and very oversold on our daily charts relative strength index indicator. All of these things combine to, hey, you're probably getting a bounce here. And 97 to 100K is my resistance point, because that is where the 55-week exponential moving average is when we come to the weekly chart. That'll be pretty stiff resistance. That's also lining up perfectly with this magenta line, which is a line of resistance for us that goes back on Bitcoin's chart all the way to 2021. So I would expect that to be the first place to stomp Bitcoin out in this dead cat bounce scenario. Also, we are leaning towards this being a dead cat bounce, not a real bounce, because our Moxie indicator on the weekly time frame and also on the daily time frame are both very bearish. They are both well below the zero, meaning that we should expect the more bearish scenarios to play out on our charts. And like I said, I'm open to that potentially being a bottom. If it came down and made a double bottom or a higher low with confidence, with a really long wick upwards, something like this on the weekly time frame. But because we broke the 55-week exponential with confidence, typically you fall down to the next key major exponential moving average at the 200-week exponential, sitting at about $70,000. So I am very worried about that potentially happening. Ideally, I'd like to call a bottom when on the monthly chart, much longer term time frame, our stochastic RSI were in oversold territory while finding support on a key exponential moving average, which in this case would potentially be the 55-month exponential. So we'll see what happens and how this shakes out. But I would really like to see this in oversold territory and then see a bottom indicator on our weekly chart, like a double bottom or a higher low, to say, hey, we found a bottom. But since this is a daily update section of this channel of mine, let's also talk about areas where we could potentially get our dead cat bounce to be stomped out, maybe even earlier than 97K. On the daily chart, that is at $90,000 and also at essentially what is $95,000 according to our 12 and our 21-day exponential moving averages there. Also, something else that adds credence to our theory of getting a bounce here is on the liquidation heat map. And this is taking a look over at Binance's liquidation points and for points that are using 10x leverage or more, because those are the biggest paydays for Binance. And we can see that there's quite a big batch of liquidity here. This is about $1 billion. It's a pretty juicy target. That is right up at about like $98,000 or so before you get up to 100K. That's a juicy target to go up and have Binance grab to make money for itself and for its market makers before potentially diving the market lower. Now, granted, there are some juicy targets higher up, right? These are some pretty big price or some pretty big financial incentives to drive the market higher with these large leveraged positions. But with all that resistance we've seen on Bitcoin chart, I doubt that would happen. And there is still money to be made to the downside, because we still have a good batch of liquidity down here if we take a look at leveraged positions on Binance that are smaller than 10x leverage. So like this really bright spot here, while it's super bright here, and we didn't see that on the previous chart I just showed you, this is only worth about $250 million, whereas that other chunk I showed you that was not nearly as bright is worth $1 billion, because the previous chart was using 10x leverage and more, so it's worth more money, whereas this is less than 10x or so. But there's still plenty of money to be made to the downside if Binance and market manipulators wanted to drive the market lower. And that is the update for the day. I'm officially looking for a dead cat bounce as of this point, as I mentioned, to about, let's just give a rough estimate of about $100,000 or so. And then I remain very worried about us potentially turning around and heading to that 70K-ish area, 70K, 65K, around there. I remain very worried about that. From a macroeconomic standpoint, things that would be causing that is the weakening of the yen, forcing people to liquidate positions in Japan, forcing them to then liquidate positions across the entire world in order to cover those positions. And that can take a certain amount of time. And also we have a lot of unemployment coming our way. Anyway, that is the update for the day. Hope you're having a good day. Do good things. Be good people. Make a bunch of money.